All right, so Standard 7 review. This standard is the age of Jackson and the events surrounding his presidency. So, Andrew Jackson, the first leader of the Democratic Party, we mentioned the kind of progression of from the War of 1812, how he was a war hero and worked his way up and was viewed as a leader in large part because of his initial connection through the War of 1812. The specific focus in this standard is Jacksonian democracy. So when you hear that phrase, Jacksonian democracy, it's just referring to his approach to his 8 years as president of the United States. So the expanding of suffrage. We mentioned universal male suffrage. This is just at this point in history the next step where the property ownership requirement is dropped. And so at this point, we said you go from wealthy white males to all white males to all males, and then later to all females. And so it gets, a progression in the voting process throughout the history of the United States. The spoils system. The spoils system was Andrew Jackson's view that if you win the presidency, so once he was in that position, that to the victor goes the spoils. So he should be able to appoint those who are loyal to him, so his friends, to government positions, and he didn't see anything wrong with that, and he felt like the loyalty should be rewarded. The nullification crisis is specifically mentioned. Nullification crisis, we said, all revolved around the view of do states have the right to basically, get rid of or not follow federal laws. So nullify, we said, is to say we're not following that. So South Carolina took a stand and said we are not following the tariffs that have been put in place because they're not going to help our state. So we're not going to follow them. And if you make us, then we will leave. We will secede from the Union. So Andrew Jackson obviously didn't take too kindly to that, and he sends in the Navy to come right off the coast in South Carolina, and they had to say, "Oh, let's kind of see if we can work something out here." And so they came to a compromise and an agreement to lessen that tariff over a period of time. But the question was, how far can states take it? Do states have rights over the federal government? And obviously, there's times where the federal government have rights over the states, and so it was the first time that really came to question since the Federalist Anti-Federalist debate back with the Constitution. So it came to question in a serious altercation that was something that could have maybe been avoided, maybe not, but it did bring light that question. The Indian Removal Act, we said most of you were more commonly view that as like the Trail of Tears. So taking the different Native American tribes from their land, mainly we mentioned in the South, and taking to Oklahoma on reservations. And so that was something that we tracked the whole Cherokee view of, well, if we assimilate, if we go through the court system, we can win this. And even with the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the Cherokee, you still had Andrew Jackson saying John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it, more or less saying I'm not enforcing that, so you can still remove the Indians, specifically the Cherokee Indians at that point in time. Then it works its way down to, okay, we have expanded our nation, not just going back to the Louisiana Purchase and the expansion and the exploration from Standard 6, but now we have people that are settling in these areas, and so we're trying to connect the north, south, and west. And so we said, remember the three R's. So you got rivers, you got roads, and you got railroads. The rivers, we went through the Erie Canal, and the idea of, okay, well, if you can not have to pass over the Appalachian Mountains, you can use the waterways, and it'll be much faster, more efficient, and it will save time, saving money. So that idea of improving infrastructure was one of Henry Clay's three main points. So Henry Clay said we've got to improve infrastructure, and during that process, we have to have protective tariffs to keep money here, and we need to bring back the national bank. So that was Henry Clay's what's called the American system. So his approach to how we could be competitive globally. Then we work our way down to social, what was going on during Andrew Jackson's presidency socially. The second Great Awakening, so he said the first Great Awakening, remember, you got to rise up in the religious revivals. Second Great Awakening, same general concept that salvation is for all people, and that there is a loving God that cares about you. Being that there's a loving God that cares about you, then you should be looking to say, okay, well, if God cares about me, I need to care about those in society around me. So people started to say, well, how can we better our society? How can we improve this? So the temperance movement is one of the social reform movements during this time, where to temper or to lessen the amount of alcohol consumed was the initial approach. Obviously, some took it to try to say we should get rid of alcohol completely, but that would be the way to better society. And this was, in large part because the alcohol was very inexpensive, and so you had just the widespread consumption of alcohol in society. Public education was also tied to this movement. If you have the religious revivals and you have people and you're telling them to take personal responsibility for their relationship with Jesus, you've got to be able to read. You got to be able to, the focus initially was to be able to read the Bible, and then it expands. And so some of your colleges and universities start to, expand and having your first public colleges and universities. So the view from Horace Mann, and so Horace Mann was one of the kind of main proponents for education for all, was that we need to set aside taxpayer money to provide for an educated population, because if now a lot more people can vote, then we should have an educated voting group in our society. And so that was another part of the public education movement. The women's rights movement, we mentioned Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the Declaration of Sentiments at the Seneca Falls Convention, but the primary focus was obviously social equality. But with the expansion of voting rights, it was, why can't women vote? What we contribute to society, why can't we be a part of this voting class? And so it was kind of the foundation for the women's suffrage movement here early on, because it still takes another 6 decades before women get the right to vote officially, but this was the foundational time. And then the last part is the significance of slavery and its effect on American politics, and it includes slave rebellions. And so we mentioned how there was a political divide, and so there was a lot of money involved with the cash crop that was being produced of cotton, and how it provided a large chunk of our exports to the world. And so how you had the approach of, well, if we get rid of slavery, will we still be as profitable? And so there was a financial implication, but more importantly, there was a moral obligation from the view of the abolitionists that we just can't have this practice in a nation that is supposed to be a nation of free people, a nation of equal representation, a nation of liberty and justice for all, a nation of equality. So you had individuals like Frederick Douglass, who was a former slave, who was able to gain his freedom, and he was very well spoken, and so he traveled around and he told his story. He had his autobiography. We mentioned the Grimke sisters, who grew up as the life they saw, the life on the plantation kind of from the other end of things, and they realized that it was wrong and that it was not the right thing to do. William Lloyd Garrison, who wrote The Liberator, and how he spread the news about different individuals, whether they were wrongfully captured, just anything that would bring light to the issue of slavery. And so you have this divide, and there's sort of a balancing act of how can we keep the idea of slavery in the South and using slave labor. How can we have that and be so polarizing? And so there was a view that maybe we can at least balance in the Senate, provide slave states and free states to have some sort of balance and not have to go to a civil war. And so that whole idea for almost a really 50-year period in the 1800s was, how can we avoid war? And it progressively gets worse, and you get to the point in time where it's, well, I guess we can't.